Hello and welcome to Intermittent Gaming Reviews. Today we will be reviewing Relicta, a new puzzle game that has come to PS4. Disclaimer, first of all, must say that developer Mighty Pologon has provided us with review copy, so if you want to take what we say with a pinch of salt, we completely understand. Right, let's get on with the review. Okay, so there's a lot to like about Relicta. In a world that's been waiting with bated breath for AAA exclusives on next-gen consoles, there's a big part of me that always keeps an eye on smaller independent developers, as often that's where you find the most inventive and brave ideas in video games. And this is mostly true for Relicta, with some caveats that I'll get into later. So what's the skiddy? Relicta is a sci-fi game set in a future where mankind has trashed the Earth and people are moving to the moon. We play as Dr. Patel, a top scientist who has been running cool experiments on the moon that incorporate magnetism and gravity and teleportation, to name but a few. Little is given away as to the nature of Relicta, other than the fact that it is a long-hidden scientific discovery on the moon. We see a glimpse of the day it all goes wrong, and our protagonist, Dr. Patel, is forced to ignore the demands of her superiors and go in search of her daughter, who is somehow linked to the Relicta-related impending doom. If that sounds a bit vague, it's because it is. The game really doesn't give you a huge amount to go on at the very start. Just kind of gives you some very, very base motivations for the character in this very sort of dramatic start. However, it then kind of pairs right back, and we basically get transported back in time to learn a little bit more about our character or characters and how this issue that's related to something called Relicta all came about. Now, though Relicta is certainly trying to inject a lot more story and character development into their game than something like The Witness, it is at heart a physics-based puzzle game. And the puzzles, for their part, are actually quite intricate, interesting, and frustrating right up until the point of completion, which is sort of what you want from a puzzle game. You want to be able to have solved it and then go, "Oh man, that seems so obvious now," after you've basically solved the puzzle that's had you tearing your hair out for the last 15 minutes. So, you're introduced to the three basic mechanics in the tutorial missions. These take the roles of teleporting blocks, magnetizing blocks, which includes messing with both polarities to attract and repel as needed, and the ability to turn gravity on and off for these blocks. Kind of everything is sort of based around the blocks, really. The blocks are mostly used to open gates by resting them on pressure pads, so the name of the game can usually be boiled down to how do I get these blocks to those pressure pads, and basically then be able to progress. And it sort of does it in a increasingly inventive way, and that's sort of the key point that I want to make. At first, I felt the pacing might be a little off, as all of the mechanics are introduced straight away in the opening moments, and then every puzzle kind of only ever relies on those core mechanics, rather than, I don't know, like you developing new skills or new technology that's at your disposal and that kind of thing. That's not really what this game is going for. But the puzzles themselves, the sort of creativity of the puzzles increases exponentially as you progress through. So that itself kind of becomes the dynamic, or the more interesting dynamic of the game. You have the same tools as you always did, but now you've got to use them to do what seems to be a seemingly impossible task, compared to the sort of earlier, easier, more straightforward puzzles earlier in the game of lift block, put block on pressure pad opens door, boom. But like the shoulders of the giants that Relicta stands on, namely games like Portal or, as I mentioned earlier, The Witness, the puzzle is always based on the mind tackling the puzzle rather than the tools that are at your disposal, which is pretty cool. I also really liked how the developer Mighty Polygon have chosen to go with Asian female cast, essentially, or at least Asian female protagonist, and I suppose the goal who you're looking for. You spend a lot of the time, I'm not going to go into too much detail, plot points, but linked with your daughter. That comes very, very, very early in the game. And also your boss or your superiors, the people that you're working with. It's all female Asian characters and I believe actors as well, which is really good, because this is probably as much an unrepresented demographic as anything in the video game world right now. The game isn't without its faults though, and some of that does come from the characters. It's difficult to say whether the script is badly written or if the lines are just delivered badly, but a lot of them just feel a bit off. There's moments that it feels absolutely fine, but there's sort of too many to kind of ignore, that just don't quite land right. You feel like it's maybe not what they were looking for. The game makes efforts to push forward in terms of inclusivity in some areas, but then the script is just sort of filled with needless swearing and shouting, which will exclude others from enjoying the game, I think. In particular, younger generations who won't access the game because of the age rating they'll now have to have, because they've sort of thrown a load of bad language into it. And the swearing really adds nothing to the narrative or the characters, and just seems a bit incongruous with the whole kind of puzzle-based world that we're given to experiment in. The story itself isn't particularly deep or original, but it does just about enough to pull you from one objective to the next. And I must admit, whereas the mystery of the witness was enough to carry me deep into that game, other first-person puzzlers I've kind of turned away from quite quickly due to a lack of narrative, or even a kind of tenuous reason for solving the puzzles. I just don't get hooked in, whereas Relicta did do enough to hook me in and kind of keep me going through the puzzles. And the game looks nice. It's not dazzling, it's not, break new grounds in terms of how its visuals, but it looks nice, and that's consistent throughout. There are obviously a bit of patchy textures in some places. Sometimes the textures don't load in properly, but bear in mind I am playing an early version of the game, so I think there's some day one patches that will be out that will probably fix those and some other minor bugs right away anyway. What is unusual though is that it is a tad frustrating at times that these lovely visuals that sort of give a real kind of atmosphere to the game, interesting scenery that's all being rendered all around you, when you actually go to try and explore any of it, you discover that it doesn't actually hold any secrets beyond the puzzles that are already there, because actually it's all held behind an invisible wall. When you get too close to the trees, a kind of mesh, glowing red mesh appears that sort of stops you from going any further, and it's like that throughout the game, so it really is just kind of all there for show. That said, I have still enjoyed my time with Relicta so far, and I think I'll continue to play it through to the end with my wife, backseat gaming, as we try to solve all the puzzles that Relicta has in store for us. Intimate Gaming gives Relicta a 7 out of 10.